Our moderator is Wyatt Rolla. Can you raise your hand and speakers are Rachel Boggins, Morgan Ham, and Dr. Shedrick McCall and Justin Sykes. So give them a warm welcome, and we are going to have to be handing back and forth mics. But
hi, good morning. As the lovely introduction said, my name is Wyatt Rolla. I use they, them pronouns, and you are listening to the Anti-LGBTQ and DEI Rhetoric and Legislation and Student and Staff Mental Health panel. I'm going to jump right into introductions for our panelists. We only have 50 minutes with you and a lot of wisdom to share from these folks. So I'm only going to give you a small slice of all the wonderful things that these four panelists have done, but very brief bios. Justin Sykes is to the far left, your far right, uses he, him pronouns. Justin came out as trans in middle school. He is currently a consultant for Partnership for Southern Equity and is hoping to pursue a career in youth-centered advocacy. He is passionate about working with youth and being a positive role model for youth that are on their gender journey. And then to my immediate right is Dr. Shedrick McCall. He uses he, him pronouns. Dr. McCall is the psychology chair at Virginia State University and has worked for a psychologist for over 25 years as a juvenile psychologist, forensic psychologist, clinician counselor for incarcerated youth, and has worked within the mental health field with patients and clients in clinical mental health diagnosis. And then to the left here, Rachel Bogan, uses they and she pronouns, is a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of the Properties of Light. They provide mental health services, training, and consultation that center authenticity, healing, and belonging for neurodivergent, queer, trans, and non-binary people of all ages. They are also passionate about building community with other neurodivergent and queer, trans, and non-binary mental health providers. And last but definitely not least, all the way to the left here is Morgan Ham. Morgan uses they, them pronouns. They are a high school student here in Chesterfield County, and they've been very active in opposing Governor Youngkin's anti-trans model policies. So you have handshakes. So we have a great panel for you all, and we're going to dive right in again because we only have 50 minutes. So please have those cards out, jot down any questions. And the first question I'd like to invite the panel to address is, as I mentioned, long panel name, but this panel is really focusing on student and staff mental health. So I think frequently the risk we focus on when we talk about these policy proposals, anti-LGBTQ, anti-DEI policy proposals, are the actual content and whether those policies are adopted and implemented. But I'd like to invite the panel kind of more broadly. How do you all think about the problem of the rhetoric and the proposals of these, anti-DEI, racist, anti-LGBTQ, transphobic policies, and how that impacts students and staff that are existing in that racist and transphobic environment?
So I think that it's extremely harmful to school environments because the goal of a school environment should be to make children have a safe environment to learn in. And if children are feeling discriminated against or feeling that they can't express themselves in an environment where they are growing up in and are developing in, they're not going to be able to succeed in that environment. And it's going to be extremely harmful for their development and their future. And it's unfair, and it makes for a more closed-minded environment for students to grow up in, when school should be the exact opposite. School should never be a closed-minded environment. It should be a place where children can express themselves and ask questions. And with this rhetoric being spewed around and legislation being thrown around, it makes for school to be a place where children feel like they have to walk on eggshells or feel like they might not be able to express themselves, which is not fair at all to students who are required to go to these schools, because they should feel like it is a safe place for them. Rachel, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. And so in my work, I do a lot of talking about trauma in the brain and traumatic stress and all that. And so thinking too about, kind of as Wyatt said, we think a lot about and put a lot of energy into whether or not these are going to be adopted, and how the impact may harm people. And the reality is that it is harming people, whether or not it's adopted. Thinking about just kind of, again, the impact of traumatic stress being that our nervous systems are activated all the time. And so being a person or a person who loves a person who is existing in systems that are racist and transphobic and ableist, that has really significant impacts on our long-term mental health, on our physical health and well-being. And thinking about kind of also the cost of advocacy, right? Like when this is happening, we can't look away. We have to stay informed. And so in doing so, we are constantly exposing ourselves to this pattern of traumatic stress. There is no rest, there is no recovery, not if we want to stay safe. And so this pattern of hypervigilance, the cost of advocacy, having the choice for young people to have to, I mean, young people are doing amazing things. Morgan is here. We have the Pride Liberation Project. We have the young people in Virginia Beach, right, that are showing up to these meetings, who are missing childhood, who are missing, the just joys of existing as young people, and that cost to their well-being and sort of the cost of advocacy in that, in order to sort of advocate on the behalf of folks that exist in similar ways, you're also potentially opening yourself up to further stress and trauma. And so again, that's really something that impacts everyone in the community level. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel and Morgan. So as Morgan actually said it really well, that this impacts everyone, right? Closing down the worldview that's available to youth and telling youth that they can't show up as their full selves in school hurts every single young person that's in our schools. But we also know that the impact of this rhetoric and these policy proposals aren't felt evenly by young people or by staff, right? There are certain populations that are uniquely and acutely impacted by the kind of hostile rhetoric and policy proposals that we're seeing. So I wanted to invite folks to talk a bit about who those student populations are, recognizing kind of we all hold multiple identities, right? How these intersecting identities may impact young people, and who is really feeling the most brutal impacts of this. And then a second question to invite you to opine on what we should all be doing. How should we all be showing up in this moment to keep all students safe, but particularly those most impacted students?
I can start off. I'd say when it comes to the most impacted students, it's the students of the identities that you can't see. You can see, and it's very often the conversation goes to the Black trans femmes of being the most impacted. And they are, and it's also, those are the identities you see. You can tell when someone is a person of color. You can tell when someone is still figuring out their gender identity at a young age, but it's the identities you don't see. It's the ways they're treated back at home that you don't see. And that is where school can become a space of safety and be a space where they have that one ally that they're not getting at home. And so, I think about that in the ways of my identities. You can tell that I'm a person of color. You can tell that I'm trans because we spoke about that, but you might not also know that I'm dyslexic. And there's other identities that you just don't know about people. And so the assumption that you can read what is on the surface is always wrong. You'll never truly know the students you're working with. You'll never truly know the colleagues you're working with. And so the ability to be tender and graceful and understand that there are human beings behind the number codes that you're giving the students. There are whole lives and personalities that are trying. And everyone is awkward in high school and middle school. You're figuring things out. I was very odd. I still am, but in high school particularly. And that is where the nourishing and kinship is needed. And that's how I think there is ways to protect those that need that protection, is saying, I see you for who you are. I see that you are still figuring out who you are. And this classroom, this office, me as an individual is a safe space for you. Even if you're not willing to share your story with me, know that I will hold space for you, because there are so many spaces in their lives and in my lives where I can't be who I need to be and who I want to be. And when I enter those spaces and then I look around and I go, oh, okay, I can put my walls down. And when you can put your walls down, you are able to actually learn and perceive. So it's holding space, creating safe spaces, but also creating spaces for learning. and shutting down conversations that don't need to be had. Because it becomes so easy for the people of color and the trans people to be doing all the advocacy. When there's so many ways to do that behind doors, where cis people can talk to cis people, and you can work through those "I don't get it" without having to put that trauma on another trans person. I'll stop there.
All right. Good morning, everyone. All right. And I think that when we talk about who this impacts, I think it impacts most of us. I think many years ago, I wouldn't be sitting right here because I really didn't understand, what was going on with those things, and just how people were, they wanted to come out, they wanted to be themselves, and when you can't, it definitely impacts you psychologically, and that's why I'm here now. Is because first of all, I say I'm proud of that people can be themselves, and we need to allow people to be themselves because it could definitely impact you in all different levels. We see the depression has increased in that population. We see that unfortunately suicidal thoughts and ideation increase in that population. So we need to create a safe space for individuals that really want to be themselves. Even as a Black man, sometimes in certain situations, I feel like I can't be myself. If I'm dressed a certain way, then there's a perception that maybe I'm not who I am. And sometimes I feel like I have to say, hey, I'm Dr. McCall, so that people could understand that there's a level of education and there's a person behind this face. So I think that we definitely have to be open. We definitely have to create safe spaces. We need to allow people to be able to talk. We need to be open-minded as individuals that, our differences don't separate us. Our differences is what can bring us together. Because if everybody was monolithic, then we would need each other. So I think that just creating that safe space for everybody and just being there for them and allowing people to talk. I know at my office, I call it the family room. And young people are going through so much today. And you just have to have that safe space for them. So I think this discussion is a spearhead in the right direction for individuals to understand, what's going on, and just to get educated and feel the impact and experiences that how it's affecting us. Thank you so much.
So a population that I feel like I can speak on that's also affected by these things is the neurodivergent population in schools. I think that neurodivergent students, speaking from my experience and from watching my peers in school, neurodivergent students have more of an issue with not feeling heard in schools or not feeling represented, because neurodivergent students often have trouble being taken seriously. And so when that intersection happens of neurodivergent queer students who are now being discriminated against for their gender identity or their sexual orientation, it just makes it only worse and makes them feel even less represented in schools. And if you aren't feeling represented in your school, you're not going to succeed in it. So what we should be doing in these moments, like they already said, is creating a safe space and just acceptance, creating a place of acceptance for students, so that way they can truly learn from each other and learn to be themselves in every environment. Rachel, did you want to say anything?
So we have a couple more minutes for this question. So I'm gonna go off script. Y'all listening? So I really appreciate that this panel names the anti-LGBTQ and anti-DEI efforts as being coordinated, right? We know that they're funded by the same entities. It's frequently the same right-wing groups that are pushing them. So we touched on this a bit in the question, but just to tease it out a bit more, or in folks' responses. So when we're seeing kind of anti-critical race theory proposals, we're seeing book bans that are targeting authors of color, so young people aren't hearing the stories of folks that have perhaps life experiences that touch on some of the same things that they've experienced. How exactly, like that second question about like showing up in those moments to keep those students safe as well. So we heard about being places of openness for queer students and having safe spaces. Is there anything specifically that folks would like to share about kind of the the student populations that are being impacted by those if we want to call them anti-DEI or really like racist policy proposals and rhetoric, like how should educators be responding to help those students feel safe in an education environment when that's in the atmosphere?
I think the first thing is that the educators have to be educated. A lot of times people just don't know what they don't know. So I think definitely they have to be educated and understand, the things that's going on in the education environment. As far as creating safe spaces, I think that that's tough because a lot of times when you say safe spaces are different for different people. Some people like to be isolated and they're comfortable with that. But when I think of safe space, it's just a place where you can go, you can be yourself, you're not picked on, you're not teased, and it allows individuals to hear you and for you to be heard. So I think those are some of the things that could be out there for the safety for the children in our schools.
Yeah, I can say that there's also, I feel like, a difference between truly learning something and passing a standardized test. And I think that a lot of ways the school system is following, let's make sure we pass these tests because I have to hit these numbers as a teacher to blah, 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 money, all these things. And so I'm curious in what the ways you can lean into bringing these banned books to students who need that extra support. What does it look like to offer a list of, I think these books would be really important for you to read, or just here's a chapter, because reading a whole book, for me, dyslexia, I'm not going to do that. But if you send me a paragraph or a chapter, that would be impactful to say, I see you, here's something that identifies with you. Another way that I see safe spaces is the symbols. What are the symbols in the room? Is there the LGBT flag? Is there symbols of hate around the room? And in that space, are conversations being held where racism is being brought up even when there aren't people of color in the room? Is that space a space where those hard and brave conversations can happen? And can I bear witness to them? Am I able to step out when I don't have the capacity? I feel like those are two tangible ways that make me know if a space is safe or not.
Yeah, I think they hit it really well. I think like Justin said, I think with seeing symbols around, I mean, I'm lucky to say in my school, I feel like I see symbols of love and acceptance in some places, especially like there's some pride flags hanging, which it's encouraging to see. And also just, I think that teachers need to, like it was said, educators need to be educated and they need to be open to communicating with their students. If a student is having an issue where they're not feeling welcome in their class or they don't feel that they can express themselves, a student should feel comfortable going up to that teacher and explaining why, and the teacher should be able to listen to them and maybe make an adjustment. I think it's just that classrooms and schools in general need to be more open-minded spaces where students truly feel that they can ask questions and communicate with the people around them instead of being shut down like these policies and rhetoric are trying to do.
And one thing I would add too is that, thinking about colleagues and thinking about the adults in the schools and thinking about ways that create safe space and visibility and like the power of hope and possibility that we can see in our diverse staff. And if we're not creating space for people to show up authentically with their students, how can we expect students to show up authentically either? So, thinking about ways that the sort of tangible items that Justin named about creating safe spaces for students, but doing that with colleagues. And so having those conversations and leveraging the positions of power in our various, communities and identities, and being able to create more truly authentic and inclusive spaces for all of the folks that are existing, and how that, again, like creates safety in a nervous system co-regulation way, but then also just in a freedom to exist and belong, which is, impactful in all the ways.
All right. So Rachel actually mentioned earlier just part of what happens from these constant hostile proposals that are pulling our attention in, right? We just had a conversation that was about how to keep students safe in public education, which, real talk, that's a very low bar, right? Like, how can we prevent people from being actively harmed by the rhetoric that's occurring in the school system, about the policies that are being proposed. And Justin made a really good point when we were prepping for this panel about like, I don't want to just have that conversation. I just don't want to just talk about how to keep students from being harmed. Like, what does it actually mean if we're looking to the future? How would we build schools? How would eventually, hopefully, a world where it's not just safety, it's not just surviving for these students, but it's thriving, right? It's like the opportunity to grow into their full selves and succeed. So I want to invite y'all, what would it like, kind of moving beyond this immediate acute threats we're facing and how we help students move through that, what would it look like to build a world for those student populations and the staff that share some of those identities and experiences where they can really can thrive?
Yeah, I can start off this. When I often do talks for other trans youth, I tell them survive until you can thrive, because that's very much what I did in my high school middle school and high school years. I did not speak in high school, and I'm still trying to unlearn what it means to speak in public spaces. On stage, I'm fine. In a small group, absolutely not. And that is because I did not speak in high school because I was too scared to be perceived incorrectly, too aware of my body and the ways I did not connect with it in order to be present in any relationships. And now that I am present in my body and present in my soul, I understand what it means to thrive. And so that can look like in spaces for youth is, why can't gender be a space to play instead of a thing you have to choose? Choose A or B. Why can't it be, let's play? What do you feel like today? Because that opens up spaces for so many people, not just the trans kids in the school, because our gender roles are so often dictated by pasts and choices. We don't really know why we do this. Like, I do this because I'm a boy or because I want to. When I think of what it means to thrive, I think of autonomy over self. I think of autonomy over schedule and time and body. I think about the fact that a piece of thriving for me is not holding my pee for 8+ hours because there are no safe spaces for me to use the restroom. I think about what it means to speak to others from a place of love rather than a place of defensiveness, because I don't know how you're perceiving me, and I'm so scared that your perception of me will lead to my own harm. So to be able to speak as me rather than how do you see me? Do I need to dodge this question? Do I just need to stay silent so I don't get hurt? I think of thriving as coming out to people and that not being my last conversation I have with them. That fear of, if I tell you the truth of who I am, will you still speak to me again? Will you start misgendering me now that you know that I'm trans, but I 100% look like a man? Like what? I also think of the space to grow and learn. I feel like that's what schools are supposed to be, but they've become in the same ways that we think of, like the ways that we look at the industrial system of, this is just a factory. You are just a cog in the machine. What happens when the cogs in the machine don't want to play that role? Is there space to grow? And that's to the students and that's for the teachers, because there are so many times where I wish I had possibility models. If I saw that it's possible to be Black and queer and successful at a younger age, would I have started speaking out earlier? Would I have been more okay in my body and space just to see those models? So the way I work with students, I've had kids come to me and say the most homophobic and racist things to me. And then years later, they're the kids that are the queer kids. And I was like, yeah, I knew that. That's why I was kind to you. So it's that, treat those kids with kindness because they might be dealing with their own internal transphobia. Give them those possibility models and hold space as they move through their pain of growing.
Yeah, I think it means having more open-minded discussions. I think especially in classrooms when we're being taught things, we are taught it from such a more narrow perspective. Like, for example, in history class, we don't learn necessarily a diverse history. It's gotten much better, I think, but we never learn about LGBTQ history. And I don't think it's just LGBTQ history in America in the 60s with Stonewall and everything. That was a crucial part of American history, and we don't learn about it. And we need to be able, I wish that we could feel comfortable asking our teachers, why don't we learn about this? Why is this not being taught to me? Because if we were to see that, if we see representation in our history or see the reasons, the people behind why we learn the things we do in school, trans kids, non-binary kids, LGBTQ kids are going to feel more represented and feel more welcome in their school. And I think we need to have more spaces in schools for these children to be open about their identity. Like, I think clubs should be able to be made for different groups, that way they feel welcome. And for example, in my school, we recently started having single occupant bathrooms. And I think that's been very helpful, at least from what I've seen with my peers who are non-binary or trans. They don't feel welcome in the girls' or boys' restroom. They feel kind of ostracized by it and feel that they don't belong in either one, or they feel uncomfortable going into it. So I think that having those options and having representation is what's going to bring us into a school environment where everyone can truly thrive, rather than just worrying about how can I survive high school as an LGBTQ student.
Yeah, and I think about like what both of you shared around the idea of possibility models and moving from, this idea of this sort of tragic other, right? This, like, as advocates, as activists, we often share the most alarming, urgent details because we want people to care. We want them to understand the urgency. And also the impact of that is we have this expectation of walking really traumatic experiences in public places all of the time. And that's how we expect trans people to exist in public. And so thinking about the opportunities for possibility and joy. So primarily my outpatient therapy practices with little young ones. And 10 years ago, there was no such thing as a children's book about a trans young person that wasn't about them being ostracized, bullied, not accepted. And the intention was to educate others on the challenges of, cis kids, on the challenges of trans kids. And the impact on trans kids and their families was this tragic existence, right? And so thankfully that has changed a lot. My bookshelves are full of stories of joy and just existence, that the point of the story, or the point of the person's sort of existence is not to educate others, but just to live childhood joy. And I think that is something that, when I think of safety and then I think of thriving, I think of having a world where we don't have to spend so much of our time and resources on creating those educational sort of existence for the education of others, that we can just exist for enjoy. And again, I feel that is changing. And I think as advocates, we also recognize that hearts and minds have to change. And so we have to be able to hold both of those things as true, that be able to describe the urgency and the very real fear, and also not have that overshadow the opportunities for joy and possibility.
I think for me, just learning. I think now that the things that I'm hearing is just things that I just didn't know, so it's hard to help if you really just don't know what's going on. And I just think that conversations like this, to help educators understand that there's individuals in the schools that don't feel safe in the classrooms, they don't feel safe using bathrooms. Once we can get that information, and then we can trickle it down and begin to develop policies, begin to have discussions, so that we can help others feel safe and the ability to thrive in the school and thrive educationally and thrive with their self-esteem, self-efficacy, and self-concepts and self-beliefs. So I think these forums need to be in schools so that the teachers can understand it, because it's just some things, and I admit it's just some things I didn't know, but I want to be there to be able to help. Whether you're Black, white, or whatever your sexual orientation is, our job is to educate you, to keep you safe, and to help you learn And I just want to create an environment that's conducive for all those things to occur. So in order for that to continue to happen, again, I reiterate that we must continue to have these conversations so that the people who don't know will know. And I think also it's a sensitive subject. Even for me, sometimes I'm very sensitive, careful on how I interact because I don't want to offend anybody. And that's because a lot of it is just a lack of education, a lack of conversations. So that's why, even as I said up here this morning, the psychologist in me began to ask Justin a lot of questions and graciously answered all the questions. So I think those are just some of the things as far as, from my perspective, it's just education, learning, building those relationships so that we can create an environment that individuals will feel safe and feel like they can thrive in the educational setting.
I just want to thank all the panelists for how generous they were in sharing. I think sometimes when we're facing these acute crises, we get so into the advocacy around the policy proposals that, sometimes we don't hear the full human stories in both directions, like Rachel was saying, both the difficulties that real young people in the school system are facing, but also their joy and their whole humanity. So I just really appreciate each of you for sharing. And also for encouraging us to not lose sight of our North Star, right? Like we're in a really dark place in some of these issue areas right now. And it's absolutely important for us to all show up and fight back against some of these attacks. But we also need to be able to imagine the world that all these young people deserve and that all of us deserve, right? And also be not losing sight of the fact that we need to be building towards that as well. So just really grateful for everything you all shared. I want to turn now for the time we have remaining to say we're really glad everyone is here this morning. You got up really early on a Saturday. Thank you so much. And also we know it's not enough to be in rooms like this, right? It's not enough to listen to the panel and feel good that you have the right opinion about these things and then go home, right? We need everybody to be doing concrete work out in the world, wherever you are in the world, whatever your role is. We need everyone to have their hands in the dirt in this moment because we are in a moment of crisis on these topics. So we have a great panel to tell you all about the work that each of them has been doing and how they've been showing up in their specific roles, and then what lessons that has taught them that maybe can transfer to folks in the audience to think about how you could potentially show up for young people and for educators in this moment. I'd like to kick us off.
Yep, I don't mind starting. I'd say allyship, there's many levels to allyship. There's the passive ally. I know how to use pronouns. I've met a trans person before, pat yourself on the back. But then there's other ways to be an ally where you are actively helping and doing the work. And one example of that is when I went to college, I ended up becoming an RA because I thought their housing system, like the housing side, was extremely trans friendly. I felt so safe. I was out. I was proud. I was excited to be working there. And I realized when someone left, there was someone high up in housing. When she left, all the positive trans rhetoric left with her. And I was like, oh, this isn't a safe space. This is a safe person with power. She made sure pronouns were always at the table. She made sure trans people had a space and was not trans herself. And when she left, I wanted to leave housing. I was like, wow, the power of one ally gave me this safe space and this job. And so it just takes one person with the right power and right ability to say, hey, let's not, or let's do, that can create space for others. And what I think I learned through that experience was that fractal effect. Start within yourself. What does it mean to take care of self? What does it mean to hold space for self? What does it mean to hold space for family? What does it mean to hold space in the workspace? And just remembering that it is a cycle, it's cyclical. What you do to others will happen to you, and how you affect change is how change will affect you. And since it's the only constant, it's better to be a part of it rather than fight it. But I will just say, being that one ally can change the courses of people's lives, and you won't even know it. I haven't told this lady this story, but she changed my life just creating a safe space, and she didn't even know I was coming. So it's small things like that.
I literally just blanked on what I was going to say.
Um, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Justin. I love the idea of, you know, the impact of one ally with power, right? And the impact on you, and then your ability to, as you said, the fractals of holding space for self, which then allows for space for others. And I think about, in my own experience, you know, the work that I do with youth and with families and community, but also how that benefits me as a person, and how creating space for myself as a non-binary clinician, and creating that space that then leads for space for other clinicians, and how in community with one another, we're doing that work for each other. And I think too, you know, speaking to kind of like what Dr. McCall shared around the idea that we're all learners, that cultural humility means we're approaching everything as learners all the time. And for me, what that means is, you know, the sort of action over imperfection, right? We're going to make mistakes. We're not going to know. We have to be open to being wrong and to learning, and being open to repair, or accountable to repair when we do cause harm. But also thinking about the ways that we can, I think as Wyatt said, it's easy to feel despair. It's easy to feel hopeless. So remembering the areas where we are still powerful, where we do hold power, and thinking about how we can bring the folks sort of forward with us. And so for me, that looks like the areas where I hold power, being able to bring folks forward, and the areas where I need support to be able to time out and be able to have folks take over. And so kind of one actionable item that is part of my practice right now is building a coalition of therapists who want to learn and be active in their allyship. And so, you know, it's not enough to say that we're affirming and friendly, like, what are we doing? How are you practicing that daily? How are you unpacking and unlearning your own stuff? How are you unpacking the stuff, the racism, the transphobia that's part of our learning and part of our professional education? What are we doing? And not as a person that is sort of educating others on that, but as a member of a community that is doing that work together, that without accountability and sort of support in doing that, that's hard. This stuff is everywhere. It's in the air we breathe. And so for me, I think that also having those tangible items, that space for self and space for learning, is really grounding in the moments of despair, that it's helpful to have that to look to and show up for in those moments when it feels overwhelming.
Yeah, I would say just create, if you want to see spaces that are more open, then make them if you can. For example, I created an LGBTQ support group for my specialty center at my school. And I remember I did it a lot last year. I remember people that were cis or straight asking me, you know, can I go? And I was like, of course you can go. Like, people feel like they have to walk on eggshells around it. And when I told my teachers about, I use they, them pronouns, a couple of them were like, how does that work? And they were like, I hope I'm not offending you. I was like, of course you're not. I would so much rather you ask questions than hold it in and just go based off what you think you need to do. I think there needs to be more open conversations, and I think everyone needs to be included in these conversations. That way people who are not a part of these communities aren't afraid to ask questions, because when they ask questions and get more clarity, they are more aware of it, they understand it better, and they're more willing to help everyone. And we need all the help we can get, and to get help from people who aren't a part of the community, aren't part of the LGBTQ community, truly brings up, from speaking for me and speaking for people that I'm friends with, seeing people who are cis or who are straight speak up for my community is extremely heartwarming, and it feels so much better to know that there are people out there who are helping and care, even though they're not a part of the community. So I just think that there needs to be more communication about these things. I think people need to feel more open to ask questions and get involved with these things. So I just think it needs to be more of an open topic for discussion, so people don't feel like they have to walk on eggshells.
Well, I'm kind of glad you said that because I think that's one of the things for me is that I do have a lot of questions. One, and two, you definitely don't want to offend, anybody. And I want to be a part of that change agent, where I want everybody. It being, as I said, being a black male and going through experiencing racism, as far as jobs, as far as being pulled by the police in the communities, things like that. I don't want anybody to feel those things. I want you to be able to speak your truth and allow your faith to be stronger than your fear. Believe in yourself and be able to be you, authentically you. And it's tough. So just hearing that, because I would ask that question. What does that mean? And I even think now, even in school, sometimes you have to ask people, if I'm talking to somebody, I say, do you date boys or girls or whatever? Because you can't just make those assumptions anymore. So I think just education, again, I reiterate, having open conversations, letting people heal, letting people not internalize that trauma and let it out so that they won't be depressed. So that they won't feel suicidal and things of that nature. So I think it's just for me, as I stated earlier, I think many years ago, I wouldn't be sitting right here because I really truly didn't understand. But I think we grow. And I think the way that we grow is being able to understand what people are going through, how they feel. And I really love the fact that you said that you love for us on the outside or the individuals that's heterosexual to ask questions because we need to know, therefore we can help and make sure that we don't offend anybody and things of that nature. So again, I just think it's a great thing. And I'm just glad you all are able to share your truth and just believe in yourself. And I think that, we just want to be here and help and just create that environment that's conducive for people to be themselves.
So we surprisingly, because we were so smooth, we have a few more minutes. So panelists, think if there's anything that we didn't hit fully that you'd like to talk about, again, both on the anti-LGBTQ efforts, but also if anyone, making sure that we also are hitting on the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, if there's anything folks would like to cover. While you're thinking, I will take moderator's privilege to say, at my day job, I am an attorney. I work on trans issues with my colleague at the ACLU of Virginia that will be on the book ban panel. And this panel, working with these folks, has been really helpful for me of the focus, again, not just on the policy impacts, the harm, but really the emotional well-being and the people as whole human beings. So I'm deeply grateful for that. And I will also take the moderator privilege to say, it's really important to pay attention to the policies. I don't know if there's another panel that will address this. So the VDOE's model policies on the treatment of trans students in our school systems, every school board will be considering that. If folks in Chesterfield, your school board has not voted on that yet, please get informed about those. A lot of the harms that Justin and Morgan were telling you about will be exacerbated by the policies that are imposed by the Department of Education that will make restroom access harder, make it harder to use affirming names and pronouns. If you don't know about the model policies, please, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm sure everyone else on this panel will be happy to talk to you. That said, are we actually?
Well, since you have some time, do we want to throw it open to the questions in the room?
Oh, sure. Well, actually, just really quick, was there anything that panelists want to say that we didn't get it hit on with our questions?
Just mention the safe schools or the Quality Virginia is where they can find the information.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to?
So if you're not familiar with the policies, Equality Virginia has a Safe Schools coordinator. You can sign up for a newsletter. They will send you emails about how to get involved, where to show up. For families and young people that are doing this and have been doing this for months and years now, show up, relieve that burden, be a community member, be a visible, safe place. But they also have a tracker where you can go and look at the next meeting for your board, whatever county you're in, and you can see when they're meeting and when it'll be voted upon. So there's very accessible ways to find out what's happening.
Yeah, I think with that, I'll give you the mic if you want to.
Yes.
There's a question in the live chat that why we're talking about the governor's statement that the policy is not optional.
Can we see if there's, to give the panelists an opportunity to?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Here.
The question that's in the chat was about the governor's statement, recent statement on the model policy, correct? And what you guys,
Yeah, his statement that it wasn't optional.
that it was not optional. That was, the governor put out the model policies, and normally model policies in Virginia are not mandates. They are models that individual local districts try to get through. So the governor has said these are not optional. They are mandates.
I can just very briefly, because I just want to open the space up to the panelists that like to, if there's any questions about kind of the mental health focus of this, but there is a statute that requires policies be adopted that are consistent with or more comprehensive than the model policies related to trans student inclusion. Districts are absolutely not required to adopt verbatim the appendix that the VDOE put out. That is not what the law requires. And I want to be really clear that the Virginia Department of Education cannot and did not change school districts' obligations under non-discrimination law to protect students based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Those obligations are still in full legal force. And if your district has policies that protect trans students and protect students based on gender identity, they still have a legal obligation to maintain those. So that said, I would love for us to focus on trans young people thriving and being healthy, whole individuals. So if anyone wants to ask our lovely panelists who are experts on that, or Morgan, did you want to? Ooh, we got a lot. Okay. Can you tell us a story that goes to our gut to inspire us to advocate, even though we are already predisposed? Stories can spark our passion.
Feels like a lot of pressure.
Okay, and then you can also ponder this one. What policies would you like to see regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly for K through 12 schools?
I got some lofty goals. I'd love for there to be gender neutral bathrooms. I'd love for there to be spaces where movement is not gendered. I took PE online. What does that even mean? I just didn't want to be in the girls' bathroom. So I'm super athletic. I love movement and did not go to PE class because it was a gendered space. I'd love for there to be access to mental health in the school system and for at home. I know that is very lofty. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I'm going to ask the panelists to speak into the mic a little more. We're hearing some people having a little trouble here.
Maybe. Let's see. I want to hear the next question first.
This lady over here had a question too.
Okay, I'll read one more and then send the mic to you. So this will bring us back to the model policies. In discussing the Youngkin model policies, someone recently, they argued to them from the perspective that parents should be notified about their child's intention to be recognized for their gender identity as their understanding of that changes. The argument is that parents should be involved. So my point, this is the person writing. My point is that there is a difference between schools being able to partner with parents when they come in to participate versus being required to out the student in all cases. How do you think we can best involve parents while not endangering students in uncomfortable family settings?
Well, I'm going to go with the lofty goals answer also. But if we as parents, I'm a parent, if you want to know who your child is, if you want to be invited into that piece of their identity, then you have to be a safe space. And so more globally, more lofty goals, we need to provide education and support for families to understand the normal experiences, the diversity of gender that exists, and not in a pathologized way. That we need to start in our pre-K. We need to start before, I've worked with preschools to talk about how to talk about gender in ways that are expansive and inclusive. And so we need to support families in having that knowledge in that framework for being the safe spaces to be invited into. That when we think about the idea of parent rights, whether it be the right to gender affirming care or the right to other things, we're also not centering youth. We want to center youth. And in doing so, we need to look at what is required of the systems, family systems, educational systems, mental health systems to be invited into that piece of young people. So I know that that's not a direct answer, but the lofty goal of creating a situation where there's not tension between parent rights and what's in the best interest of all youth.
I agree. I think my answer might not be as direct either, but I just think the governor is trying to say that parents' rights includes parents being aware of a child changing their pronouns or changing their name. And there's a fine line between a parent being informed on what their child is doing in school and a child's safety being at risk because their parent finds out that they are trans or non-binary or trying to change their name. It's not fair for a student's identity. A student should be able to be at school and it be a safe space, and that shouldn't be at risk. Them expressing themselves should not put them at risk of having even more trouble at home if they have homophobic or transphobic parents. There needs to be a line drawn. And if there is a concern where an administrator for some reason wants to inform a child's parents of their identity, a school counselor should talk with that child first and say, would it be safe? Because it is not the school's responsibility to introduce their child's identity to their parents. That is the child's responsibility. If a child is not ready to tell their parents about their identity, that is their choice. That is not the school's choice. A school or an administrator does not have that privilege to out a child to their parents, because coming out for a child is extremely emotional process, especially if a child does not have a healthy family. And outside of that, I remember watching an interview with Glenn Youngkin, and he was being asked what he would say to students who are LGBTQ and don't live in safe environments, and regarding his model policies with children being outed. He said, trust your parents. That's not only a slap in the face to children who aren't safe at home because of their gender identity, that is closed-minded to people who grow up in unhealthy homes regardless of their gender identity for other reasons. So it needs to be kept in mind that there is a fine line between parents knowing what their child is doing in school and how a child is expressing their gender identity in school, because that could lead to a child not having a safe home, and that a child's safety should be put over everything else.
So we're wrapping at 9:50. Okay, well, it actually took us a few minutes over because I was ambitious with our question period. But thank you all so much. I know that the panelists will be back at 4 o'clock for questions. So if you have any other cards, please send them our way. Thank you.